Hi nine 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 nine. Hi na nine 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 nine. Hi nine nine nine. Bum bidi dai dai. Hi dai dai dai. Bum bidi dum. Hum bai dai dai. Got that? It's called Shomrim Hafkid. Alai la 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 la. Bidi dum bum 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 bum. Hidi da na 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 didi dai. And nine, did I die, and then nine, 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 and then nine, nine, and nine, and then nine, nine. Hi, nine, 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 and nine, 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 and nine, nine, nine. Hi, nine, 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 and nine, 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 and nine, 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 and nine, 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 nine. Hi, nine, nine, nine. Shalom Chevra, thank you for joining. It is wonderful to see you. This is how we see each other these days. But I'm thrilled to be here with you all. And as some of you know the backstory, but perhaps not everyone, I was blessed last week to turn 39. And so in honor of that, I want to say achievement for survival. I think it's my parents' achievement. I don't know how they kept me alive. There were certain years. But the blessing of survival, I wanted to talk about the Lamed Tet melachot. The Lamed Tet melachot. And to do that differently. And I looked around, I couldn't find material. That looked at the Lamed Tet melachot, not from a legalistic perspective, but from a more philosophical and ethical and justice perspective. And so that is the goal here, and there's quite a bit to unpack. The framework will be such that I will do a presentation of each of these 39. They'll always be Tuesday at 10 o'clock Arizona time, 1 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Israel, 10 o'clock Tuesdays, Arizona time. And the idea is 10, 15, 20 minutes of presentation on that particular malacha, and then a space for brainstorming, questions, thoughts, critiques, and the like. And I think we'll normally have a little slideshow, but then we'll take that away. I think you can access my video if you prefer, but some slides there to kind of enhance, and then we'll take that away for the Q&A part, and everyone can put their video on so we can see each other and engage a little bit more. AJ, we're good?
Should be good.
Great. Okay, so friends, I'm going to start with some elementary material. This will be slightly longer to make the initial connections, but I'm going to presume a pluralistic framework. But here's what I mean by that in this regard. I only want to say descriptive things, nothing prescriptive around religiosity. So that is to say, although the traditional framework has to do with what we do and don't do on Shabbat, I'm sure every single one of us has a different Shabbat practice on this. And so my attempt, or my aim, is not at all to talk about how we should live Shabbat, but if there's anything prescriptive, it's how we should live the other 6 days of the week. And how we will achieve that on Shabbat, we'll come to our own conclusions. But I am using as a jump-off place the traditional framework of the Lamed Tet melachot, which are the categories of prohibition on Shabbat, which has a few origins. First of all, they most obviously in the Mishnah of Shabbat in the Babylonian Talmud, chapter 7, and then the Mechilta of the Rabbi Shmuly deals with, it lists these 39, or in the Mishnah parlance, 40 minus 1. 40 minus 1. And then if you look in the Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat, page 49b, it lists these 39. Now, like a lot of issues, it's kind of like that question, are we beings of emotion or beings of reason? Does our reason just justify what we already sort of feel emotionally or intuitively? So too, is the 39 actually generative, or is the 39 kind of post facto, that they kind of had a system and then they kind of had to label it with the 39? And there's some interesting debates there. And they line up these 39 melachot, these 39 dimensions of work, with the corollaries of the items of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the work of building this tabernacle in the desert, which represents freedom, the transition from Egypt to the Promised Land, where they exist in this space, which, by the way, some of the Mefarshim, some of the commentators say the reason for the Mishkan is a result of the Egel HaZahav, as a result of the golden calf. God wanted no physical manifestation of divinity, But they took their gold from Egypt and they built a golden calf. And so God said, okay, there's got to be a concession. I see the people really want physicality in this world. They really want a material representation of God. We can't go as far as Islam will go later of having no representation. We want something. So let's have this Mishkan that will travel with us where divinity will be experienced. Okay, so the 39 are derived from those 39 aspects of work. And then the Jerusalem Talmud, because if anyone's not aware, there is a Babylonian Talmud and a competing Jerusalem Talmud. Interesting enough, the diaspora version wins out. The Babylonian Talmud is more authoritative than the Jerusalem Talmud, even though it was written in the diaspora. And the Jerusalem Talmud derives the 39 based on gematria, numerology. I won't get into the details there. And then it's worth noting there's also 39 toladot, subcategories, in addition to the 39 of melachot, the broader categories. Please note questions or thoughts you have so that when we get to the discussion point, we can engage in that. Okay, Lamed Tet. So why is it called Lamed Tet? Because Lamed means 30, and it's in number value, and Tet is 9. So 39 melachot, 39 dimensions of work. Okay, now here's the next layer to this. Okay, fine, the Mishkan, but how is that connected to creation? That there's also 39 dimensions to the creation of the world. And here I lean on one of the great Jewish thinkers of the 20th century, Nechama Leibowitz, who is notably, although it's not her most important trait, but is also the sister of Professor Leibowitz, who was a very radical thinker himself. But she was one of the great biblical commentators of the 20th century. And she offers over here 7 comparisons to the Lashon in Bereshit, the language of creation, to the Lashon of the Mishkan, to the language of the building of the tabernacle. Some of these will be obvious. I'll highlight just 1 or 2. It says, we say in Kiddush, those who say Kiddush, the prayer over the wine or the grape juice on Shabbat, we say, Vayachulu hashamayim v'aretz v'chotz v'am, vayachal Elohim b'yom hashvi malachto asher asa. Vayachulu, the language of Vayachulu, so too in the language in the Mishkan of the tabernacle is v'teichel kol avodat mishkan ohel moed vaychal Moshe et hamalacha. So malachto, God uses malacha to create the world, does work to create the world, the language of malacha. So too the language of malacha in building the Mishkan, and so too the language of how we think about Shabbat frameworks is the language of malacha. Okay, so and then another one, again, Nechama Leibowitz has 7 different comparisons. Here's just the second one I'll offer. V'yas Elohim harakia. V'yas Elohim et harakia. That God made the firmament, and God made the 2 great lights, and God made the beast, the beast of the earth. So there's all this v'yas, and then by the Mishkan, v'asu li mikdash. It's the same language of like osei shalom, make peace. You should make or you should do. And most famously, va'asu li mikdash v'shochanti betocham. Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. Okay, so there's a number of language parallels that Nechama Leibowitz points out to very beautifully that shows us that this construction around Shabbat resembles the idea of the Mishkan, this divine dwelling between Egypt and the Promised Land, and also in the creation of the world. And so the idea here is we refrain from the Lamed Tet Malachot on Shabbat in order to reflect on how to return to this work in a sense of renewal, right? That's not to say that these actions are bad, and thus in the utopia of Shabbat, we want to refrain from the bad, but rather these actions are good, and in order to return to them renewed, we need to step away from them and reflect on them in order that our work can be more generative and holy and ethical and just. Okay, now my dear wife Shoshana often asks the question, is it that on Shabbat we are becoming our ideal self, or that Shabbat is a space to restore our best self of our 6 days of the week? Okay, so is Shabbat the ideal, or is Shabbat generative for the ideal? Another way to think of that, in our calendar, we think of Sunday as the final day of the week. Do we? Is that how we think of it in America? Yeah. Monday's the first day of the week, right? Whereas in Shabbat is the last day of the week. Sunday's the first day. So does that mean that right? Yom Rishon is Sunday. Do we think of Shabbat as sort of the pinnacle of creation, or that we're trying to achieve, or Shabbat as restorative of the other days of creation. Okay, so that's a little bit of the opening of the connection. Now today, as I said, each session, so that first 10 minutes was just kind of laying the framework a little bit. So that's why we'll be a little bit longer today. But that's laying the framework of connection between Bereshit, creation, Mishkan, the tabernacle, and the 39 melachot of Shabbat. And then not just looking past, but looking forward, what does that mean for how we think of society today and our work to repair ourselves and our homes and our community and ultimately the world. Okay, so this is Malachet Makshevet, these thought-through activities that we engage in. And the first of those is called Zoraya. Zoraya. Zoraya means seeding or sowing or planting. Anything that enables vegetative growth, okay? Now, this can tap into two levels of freedom because Shabbat is ultimately about freedom, just like the Jubilee year or the sabbatical. The sabbatical year is the year of freedom for an academic. I argue that every professional should have a sabbatical year, not just academics. Actually, most academics might not even get it every 7, or clergy members. But everyone should have a year every 7 where they can step back from not just their land, but their work in order to restore. Okay, that's a broader conversation. Shabbat is about freedom. Why? It's connected to Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit, this connection of freedom as in human free will. We'll talk about that in session 2. But also Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, that the exodus from Egypt is fundamental to the Shabbat experience, as mentioned in the Kiddush and throughout the liturgy. Also, Zoraya, this notion of seeding or planting, is connected to day 3 of the creation story, of course, the growth of vegetation. And then when we look at the Mishkan, again, we're going to go back and forth between creation and tabernacle. Tabernacle, the first 11 of the melachot are concerned with, goes into making the bread and the dyes. Okay, now today we're very disconnected from the agricultural experience, or at least I am, many of us are. Perhaps you have a garden, you do engage in gardening. Perhaps you yourself have a farming practice. But my attempt here is not to share that our relationship as Jews to the agricultural experience is merely one of the past, but one of the current. Not only in how we engage in it today practically, but also Israel, let's say roughly half of the Jewish population, or 40 to 50% of the world Jewish population has returned to an agricultural relationship in many ways within a Jewish sovereignty, but also that as a theoretical construct, we should think about the agricultural cycle perhaps more, and that we should not, on an ethical level, be so disconnected from how our food systems operate. Okay, now what do I mean that this is connected to the bread and the dyes? Okay, the bread is the show bread called the Lechem Hapanim. Actually, it's a fascinating name. The Lechem Hapanim, the bread that was in this Mishkan, is Lechem Hapanim means the bread of faces. I've never heard somebody call it that. The bread of the faces. That it should always be showing. The bread should be showing, and on Shabbat we're going to change this bread. So there's a fundamental relationship to bread. That's why bread is so fundamental to the Shabbat experience as well. But also, Zoraya is connected not only to growing, growing the crops as related to producing bread, but also to producing the dyes. The dyes will be used, producing the herbs, which then produce the dyes, which will be used to beautifying the tabernacle, the Mishkan as well. Okay, so now if I wanted to say something practical about Zoraya, which I want to say very little about, this has to do with how we relate today to watering and pruning and weeding as Shabbat experiences. If one gets even more technical, they wouldn't eat watermelon over a grass area lest the seed fall, and even though that's probably not going to grow watermelon on that grass there, anything that potentially relates to the growing experience, and rinsing one's hands over the grass, opening one's window shade in order that plants could get more sun, putting fresh cut flowers into a vase of water. So the practical level of how some who engage in traditional Shabbat experience is quite extensive. And again, that is not viewed as just legal technicalities, but I want to argue as a reminder, a restorative reminder of how we engage in the renewal process of creation, and now into the greater and deeper meaning around Zoraya. Okay, let's jump in. I want to argue that the Zoraya is ultimately about a potentiality. As we look at the seed, it's about potentiality. And the first philosophical framework I want to lay out is the neo-Aristotelian capability approach, which I first encountered through a lecture I heard directly from Martha Nussbaum, a professor of law and ethics at the University of Chicago. And this is quite a complex idea, and I've read about it also through Amartya Sen, another very a renowned figure in the philosophical and applied philosophical world. And here the idea, don't worry, it's not as esoteric as it sounds, but the idea is that and this is a very simplified version, but I encourage you to read more about it. Everyone has a capability, every being has a capability, and anything that prevents the freedom of a living being from actualizing and thriving and flourishing from that from the capacity of that capability would be morally wrong. And thus, from a utilitarian perspective, the measure is not merely happiness. How do we reduce suffering and increase happiness for beings? But how do we construct a society that enables all beings to flourish and be nourished to actualize their unique capability? In the justice world, as we used to talk about equality, now we talk about equity, which is to say everyone doesn't get the same stuff, but rather everyone gets what they need. So too, in a capability approach, everyone has a different capability, and we shouldn't just issue out, stimulus checks is kind of a random example. Maybe we should give stimulus checks, perhaps a bunch more. But actually, people should be given the freedom that they need in order to uniquely flourish. Now, this is not only has that utilitarian perspective, but also the Kantian, which is normally kind of contrasted with the utilitarian's perspective, but the Kantian approach in that each person is an ends in themselves. Yet it differs from that in that we embrace a deeper plurality of values in assessing the good life for each unique person. We're not going to have some universal imperative that we impose on each individual, but rather each person has a seed of potentiality within themselves that needs to be nourished and needs something different to be nourished. Okay, so there has to be equality on a baseline. Again, that's a floor, not a ceiling. Equality is a floor, not a ceiling. Everyone needs access to quality education, running water, clean water, access to healthcare, basic human needs that people need to survive. And then we don't stop there. Now everyone has a seed, a spiritual seed, an intellectual seed within them, a capability. And in order to flourish, they're going to need a lot more to actualize that. So how do we think about deep potentiality from a mystical perspective? Here we're drawing on Bereshit Rabbah 10:7 or Zohar 61a from the first volume there, where it famously says, there is no blade of grass below that does not have an angel or a star which strikes it and tells it to grow. Now, strike might sound violent. Let's call it a little love tap, a little love type saying it to grow. So every form of life has an angelic force behind it on a mystical level that is encouraging it to grow to its potential. That is to say, there is a seed planted within all of life, that is generative towards actualization, towards a flourishing. And this is part of what Zoraya is about accessing that deeper level of life potential and nourishing that to not merely fit into social conformity or to survive, but in order to thrive to one's uniqueness. Now, how is this connected to nature as well and divinity? The Degel Machane Ephraim, who likes gematria, again, numerology, comparing the value of the Hebrew letters and making generative comparisons, says that the gematria of Elohim, the numerology of the word for God, or one of the names of God, matches the gematria for Hateva, nature. Now that's Gavaldic. That's very interesting. If you think about that, what is that? Nature is God. Now, we don't have to go to Spinoza. Spinoza, as a pantheist, says, okay, that's it. Nature is God. God is nature. It's all the same. Panentheism goes beyond pantheism, which is to say, yes, God is within all of creation, but also beyond, within it all, but beyond, the creator of it and the holder of it, but beyond as well. Actually, it's worth noting, I should have noted it already, but because Dr. Fishbane, assuming Dr. Mona Fishbane is still here, yeah, I see her there. I first learned that gematria from her amazing son. I'm a student of hers and of her husband's and of one of her sons, although hopefully the other as well. They're a Jewish theology family, and so I first learned this idea actually from her son. So it's amazing not only that I can have the mitzvah to give the proper attribution, but also to honor his wonderful mother who's here. Now, this idea is part of a distinct immanentist theology. That is to say that it promotes the idea that the spiritual world permeates the mundane. These are not distinct realms, the Kodesh and the Chol. There's the holy over there, the mundane over there, engage in the holy, reject the mundane, but rather it is infused within and deeply interconnected. It's also not a secularized mysticism like we said about Spinoza, right? By Spinoza, that where there's a secular reality that is still ultimately mystical. Okay, let's keep going. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Breslov movement. There's no pictures of him, so we'll just show a chair, the famous bris milah chair, the circumcision chair, which I think I saw in a museum in Yerushalayim. I think it was the original. Anyways, so Rabbi Nachman says sicha means meditation or prayer. Sicha in this context means meditation or prayer, has the same root as siach meaning a bush. And then he argues that every bush yearns to live and to grow, and he depicts vegetation as adding strength to our prayer. This is part of Hisbodedus, that we should go out into the forest. We should go out into the forest alone. Professor Allen up there in Flagstaff is probably easier to do than down here in the desert. But we should go out into the forest, engage in Hisbodedus. We should scream. We should psychologically, cathartically, we should release the subconscious or deeper unconscious layers into our own psychic sphere, into the divine sphere, as a form of communication to self, as a form of communication and connection to God. And that the prayers that can emerge, the conversation that can emerge within the forest, within being amidst the bushes, has a much deeper potentiality, because it reminds us of our own inner seed, our own process of Zoraya, our own process of planting seeds and of nourishing our own inner unique seed. Of course, this is also why Moses encounters God at the burning bush, who he, of course, misses at first and then eventually sees. He misses it and then sees it, as the Ramban, as Nachmanides points out, because and Nachmanides says, because he didn't spiritually prepare himself, which is to say that until we have found this potentiality, this seed within us, we can't see that beyond us as well. So the Slonimer Rebbe says, Ein od milvado, doesn't mean that there's no other God. There's no other God except God, but rather there's nothing but God. There's nothing but God. Ein od milvado, which is to say all of nature leads us back to that path, to the oneness of all creation, the interconnectivity of all life. And that by sowing a seed, we are attempting to actualize a representation of the divine. When we expand nature as an expansive construct, I don't want to get into the galaxies and things that I know very little about, although I read quite a bit about, that when nature expands, and we are a part of expansive sense of nature, it's kind of like when we expand our human nature, expand our human freedom by expanding knowledge. When you have more knowledge of choices, you have more choices, you have more freedom, one might say, or maybe less freedom, you might say. But this idea that we, in planting in the world, and becoming more in touch with the seeds, we actually are expanding divinity. We're expanding Torah. We're expanding divinity into the world. Okay, so each seed within a fruit reminds us of a soul within each person. When we eat fruit and we meditate on that, we make a bracha, we make a blessing, we thank God for this fruit, and we encounter the seed. It evokes an awareness of our own inner seed, and we're challenged to see beyond the surface of reality into the hidden mystical dimension. Where there is wisdom buried within the universe. This, of course, also with language or any symbols or representational objects we encounter that only evoke a deeper level of consciousness and a deeper level of reality that goes beyond the physical world, beyond the objective, if there's such objective reality at all, and beyond the realm of language. So how do seeds grow? How do souls grow? We shift our consciousness from an external physical planting process to a deeper spiritual and intellectual consciousness around human potentiality and dignity. We water our inner seed. This is a part of what Zoraya is about. Now, you might say it's a violent act to plant a seed in another person. We don't want to plant a seed in someone else. They have their own seed. Many people try to do that. A religious fundamentalist might try to plant a seed of emistic Torah, of truth inside someone else. But rather, our role as educators, as thought partners in relationship, is to help be a partner in having someone else nourish their own seed rather than trying to plant that seed. Now, it's interesting to note that the first mitzvah of the Torah is Peru Urvu. Peru Urvu is the very first mitzvah of the Torah. The first mitzvah of the Torah is to procreate. To procreate. And it's interesting that the first mitzvah of the Torah is aligned with the first Av Malacha of Zoraya. Zoraya, the first Av Malacha, the first of these 39, is connected to this idea of creativity. The Me'am Loes says, actually, you can fulfill the mitzvah of procreation through intellectual and spiritual creativity, which works not only for those who have suffered through infertility, but also for those for various reasons who have chosen, or it's been thrust upon them through being single or through other factors of life, that it is not in their cards to have children. Spiritual and intellectual creativity is a way to fulfill the mitzvah of Peru Urvu each day, and also in one's later years, beyond the age of fertility. One can continue to fulfill this mitzvah. Of course, having a child is the ultimate hope in the future. It's the ultimate belief that there's a future that's worth investing in, and investing by putting a life that one will love and nourish into the future. Now, there's a lot to say on this particular issue about the potential harm that can come from insemination, which ought to be obvious. But one might argue that polygamy historically is rooted in evolutional psychology, the desire to spread one's seed, to expand one's empire. In fact, one of the tragic ways we think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is through kind of a kind of insemination warfare, if you will, that the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, are seeking to reproduce as fast as possible, as are certain parts of the Palestinian population, in an attempt to see, in a population warfare, which is very complex and well beyond the scope of what we're doing today. Okay, I'm moving towards a conclusion here. Again, we're only going long today because this was added an introductory element to this series. And but let's continue with Zoraya as we seek to conclude. Zera seed is not only a personal issue, which, by the way, we okay, I don't want to go on that tangent. The personal issue of procreation and Peru Urvu, but also Jewish peoplehood, Jewish continuity. We talk about Zera Avraham, the seed of Abraham, right? Or Zera Yisrael. People talk about paternal, what do we call it? Paternal Jews, the patrilineal descent, as opposed to matrilineal descent, right? From a traditional Jewish perspective, you're a Jew if you convert, or if your mother's Jewish, right? The Reform movement adopted patrilineal descent a few decades ago, which is to say, having a Jewish father is enough. And so now there's a huge shift and debate among the Jewish people: who is a Jew? Who is a Jew? Not only by which conversion counts, but also by this issue of if you have just a Jewish father, is that enough? However, the Kabbalah actually validates this approach, that Zera Yisrael, that one with a Jewish father has a Jewish seed, so to speak. We'll come back to this, the dangers of this approach in a minute, although the potentials there also is that there is a Kabbalistic notion that we should gather those seeds back to the peoplehood source, and so there should be a path towards traditional conversion, or again, in a more progressive Judaism, that conversion isn't needed at all. Although, to be sure, the Reform movement does welcome conversion by those who have just a Jewish father, by those who want it, but also validate that the Jewish identity is valid if they don't want that conversion also. Okay, so Zera Yisrael means ancestors. It's past looking. The seed is the past, right? Now, we can transcend our planter, we can transcend the planter, or you can honor your planter. Where did you come from? Do I want to be particularistic or just universalistic? Where did I come from? Is God my planter? Are my parents my planter? Are my ancestors of the Jewish people my planters? What's my relationship to my seed of where I've come from? What is my essence? Freud thinks to some degree our essence is so shaped by our early childhood experiences that the essence in many ways is almost not there. It's so malleable. So just like Marx, our socioeconomic status is so malleable that it reshapes us. But then again, someone like Spinoza or Darwin or others who look more at DNA are going to think that our essence actually, again, nature versus nurture, our essence is so determined that those factors are in many ways secondary. We're going to look at that in session 2 next week, this issue of determinism versus freedom, human freedom, as it relates to the Lametet Melachot. Now, in terms of philosophical essentialism, we should note some dangers. Essentialism can be very dangerous. It can be racist, that the white person is fundamentally different than the person of color. It can be Jewish supremacy, that the Jew is fundamentally different and fundamentally better. We are chosen, and chosenness, it does not mean we have a special, distinct mission to achieve morally in the world. It means, which is a very noble view in my understanding. But for some, it means the Jew is the ideal. The seed of the Jew is more holy. Our very essence is more holy. We got to keep the seed pure. In fact, many of those who are far too stringent and set boundaries around conversion are motivated, perhaps one might say, by such a notion that the seed is pure and we have to keep the purity of that seed alive. So that it not be made impure. And of course, this is very problematic. Just as notions, of course, feminism has different strands. Some strands of feminism think that men and women are fundamentally the same, and gender is merely a construct. Well, gender is obviously a construct, but that biologically, actually, those differences are very insignificant, even to the extent that we are fundamentally the same in our consciousness of life. And there's others who say, actually, we're fundamentally different. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have equal treatment in law and in society and in religion and the like, but we are fundamentally different. And honoring those differences is also a part of feminism. Nonetheless, essentialism of that we are fundamentally different can be very problematic in many ways. And again, as we see in white supremacy today, or in other groups that promote hate, oftentimes there's an essentialism that can be rooted there about fundamental human difference and capability. And this is actually one of the great debates in academia with Larry Summers at Harvard. Should men be allowed to have more of a role in science and math? I don't remember if it was math also or just science, because men have, empirically, we know men are more capable of higher levels of science. Of course, great debates around that, around how we legislate around human difference, if at all. Okay, big tangent. Okay, we're moving towards the conclusion of Zoraya, then we'll move the conversation. Rav Shlomo Volbe, a great 20th century teacher of Musar in Jerusalem, taught the world is built of your love. Olam chesed yibana. The world is built of love, from Psalms, from Tehillim 89:2. Every act of chesed, every act of kindness, even a small one, he says, is an actual act of building and creation, enlivening the spirit of the downtrodden and the brokenhearted. Okay? Now that is to say, going back to Zoraya, that the goal here is planting seeds, our own, and nourishing our own seeds, and being a partner with the divine in creation. Shabbat, we step back from creation in order to return to our work to be a partner with the divine in recreating or completing creation, if you will. And the most primary way we think of creation and completing, because God created a broken world in order that we could be partners in finishing that creation, or partnering in the ongoing renewal of creation, is through kindness, is through chesed, Okay, my last 2 points, and then we're going to open it up. Zoraya, look at the word. Zoraya, zar is in there, foreign, and ra, evil. What happens when you make your seed foreign? You make your seed foreign, you're capable of evil. The seed within you, the zar, the seed within you, we have to become attached to it, connected to it. When we become alienated from it, we become capable of great evil. Here's how Rabbi Nachman says it. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You shall love your fellow as yourself. He says reacha doesn't mean your fellow. It means your evil. You shall love your evil like part of yourself. I love this Torah. Because he says some of the greatest evil is done by those who aren't aware of their own shadow. If you're not aware of your own darkness, you're capable of great evil. And so, through therapy, through spiritual writing, through chavruta, through whatever prayer, through whatever meditation, through whatever work we need to do, we need to become self-aware of our own complicity, our own dimensions, our own subconscious layers of being, so that we can own them and take responsibility for them, our own privilege or misgivings or harms that we put into that we're not even aware of. And so again, Zoraya, the seed within us has an evil there. So the seed is not only pure, the seed within us has the potential for great evil. And so the more alienated we become from the pure good seed, and the more we allow it to unconsciously channel the Yetzer Hara, our inclination to do harm, the more detrimental. And so, friends, here's where I'm going to pause. That our partnership in the renewal of creation is to tend to the earth, to plant seeds on a physical level, but on a spiritual level, to nourish our own inner seeds, our own inner essence, to acknowledge our capabilities and become more aware of them, and to nourish them and our potentiality, and to be sure to create spaces for others to do that in a society that is just, that can enable that for others as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is take everyone off mute, and those who want to be on mute, please mute yourself again. And those who want to now share or react or question or critique will have the opportunity to do that. Again, the goal of this is to be much quicker each week, but there was an introductory element to this today, so that's why it went a little bit longer. So, but the end time for this first session will be 11, so we'll go no longer than 11 my time zone, no longer than 20 minutes. Okay, floor is open. Feel free to chat as well if you want. Okay. Yeah.
Shmuly, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Fishbane.
It's Mona Fishbane. First of all, thank you for your lovely words
yes,
about
shalom, shalom. Yeah, you're fantastic.
I get this of a lot of Jewish learning all around me, and including during lockdown with my husband. So I wanted, first of all, this is brilliant. I am so excited about being part of this series and learning from you. And it's just, I love what you said today. I wanted to share a couple things outside of Judaism that I think relate to what you're saying, also spiritual texts. One is from Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist Vietnamese monk, who says that we all have inside ourselves seeds of love and compassion. We also have seeds inside us of anger and resentment, and that we should water our seeds of love and compassion, not anger and resentment. And then he says that he calls it selective watering, and he says we should also water our partner or our spouse's seeds of love and compassion and anger and resentment, which I think is really powerful because it brings in the ethical and the relational about watering the seeds. And one more point, related, sort of similar. There's a Confucian term, Jen, Jen, or some people pronounce it Ren. This comes from Dr. Keltner's book, Born to be Good. And it's basically a Confucian idea, Jen, of bringing out the good in the other, which is, again, an ethical or relational task. And I think, again, I do a lot of work with couples, so I think it's something that's really central to couple relationships. So I wanted to throw that in because I think it's very much in keeping with what you're talking about.
I love it. It's such a great contribution. I'm going to follow up with you on that, but I think those are really wonderful, especially within the partner level. So thank you. Okay, someone else.
Shmuly?
Yes.
We have a question from the Temple Gates of Prayer.
Oh, great.
And this is the question. If Shabbat is to step back and renew from the honorable work of building of the world, how do we explain God's need, quote unquote, in Genesis to pull back from this building process?
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Okay, excellent. So, right. So let's just flesh out that question a little bit there. If Shabbat is to step back and renew the honorable work of building of the world, how do we explain God's need in Genesis to pull back from this building process? Okay, wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay, so there's a lot to say about that. And in the interest of time and wanting to hear from other people, I won't say too much. But okay, so this idea of menucha, of rest, is something fascinating. The idea that God models menucha, of rest, the importance of parents modeling for this for children. But also, it's interesting to know, because if you're like me, you have trouble going to bed at night for lots of reasons, but one of them, that there's still too much to do, that God goes to bed each night, so to speak, without creation being done. So how could that happen? You go to bed, creation, so too, it's modeling divinity to actually go to bed. You can use that as a rebuke to your partner if they're staying awake. But also that God models menucha, God models rest by stopping on the seventh day is amazing. That actually it doesn't say 6 days is what we want to emulate from God, and then one is something else, but actually that seventh day we want to emulate as well. That rest is an actualization of creation. It's built into it. And that rest is it's interesting that we are refraining from dimensions of creation in order to engage in deeper layers of creation. That God is still creating the world, so to speak, on the seventh day, but a different spiritual realm. We call it the neshama yetera, the extra soul we get on Shabbat. That there's spiritual creativity that emerges in that act. Okay, so in Kabbalah we call this tzimtzum. That tzimtzum means God retracting God's self in order to create space for otherness. This, of course, is a great point of education, a great point of parenting, or a great space for partnering or any relationship, that we remove a part of ourselves as an act of humility to create more space for others. And that Shabbat is a part of that experience within all of creation, that there's so many words, there's so many actions, and not enough being, not enough silence. Shabbat is an act of tzimtzum, an act of creating space within creation to reflect, to be introspective, to renew, but also not just renew, to have a deeper layer of creation. Okay, I hope that was in some way responsive to the question.
Can I add to that?
Yes, Rabbi, is that Rabbi Neil? Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, how are you?
So, if indeed Tzimtzum, started creation, there's a different kind of tzimtzum that God does when God retracts away from creation, on Shabbat at the end of the 6 days, and that the rest, that perhaps if we look, if we combine science and Torah, which I don't always like to do, but in this case I think it's convenient that when if each one of the days of creation was millions or billions of years, that it's an era, that this is the era of God's rest but not ours, right? This is the era when God sits back and does the work of the neshama yetera, but it's not our time to do that. It's our time to actually do the work. We get one day. God gets forever, but we get one day. So
beautiful. Thank you for that. Love that. Thank you. So, okay, someone else. Questions, thoughts, clarifications, critiques?
Hi, Shmuly. Thanks so much for this really compelling Torah. And one of the things I wanted to ask you to maybe expand on a little bit is the relation between Chesed and Zoraya, and the question of whether refraining from Zoraya on Shabbat also then on some level means refraining from Chesed. And if there's a way in which, and I'm kind of wanting to come back to the piece of your teaching that is about attending to, attuning to, being present to our own complicity with ill, our own sort of evil seed, so to speak. If there's some sense in which where there's a responsibility or an obligation for a chesed during the week, something about even pulling back from chesed, even that, it has to do with a way of being present to, maybe more present to than we often are, our own sort of evils, our own sort of difficult tendencies to presence forth. Anyways, I just wondered if you expand a little bit on that relation between Chesed and Zoraya, and the possibility of Chesed itself as something to be laid aside in keeping and remembering.
Awesome. Love that, Professor Ira Allen. It's amazing. So thank you for that. And I think, so there are of course different ways to think of this, and I want to lay out just one framework. That one of my kids was very upset when I told them that it was not our practice to give tzedakah on Shabbat. Of course, if it was a life-saving incident, we would, but it's not our practice to to handle money on Shabbat so that we can relate to money differently, because money can be, I don't have to explain to everyone here, money can be such a corrupting and dangerous vehicle and burning vehicle in addition to one of great potential. But they said, how could that be? Shabbat is supposed to be a time of goodness and connecting to God and helping other people is so central to that. I said, okay, so part of this is stepping back from what is good to do the good, to do the good differently, to recharge, to reflect on how we're doing it and to potentially do it differently. And it does not mean it's bad. Just like a fast day doesn't mean food is bad, that the ideal is to fast, it's to relate to food differently, or refraining from sexual relations in a partnership doesn't mean sexual relations is bad, but we want to return in a more enhanced way. So too, refraining from a certain dimension of kindness within the universe, we pause in order that it can be different. Also, in order to return to learn how to receive, that we are not just beings of giving, we're also receiving beings, and that there's a deep interconnectivity of that the Kabbalah, the receiving that it can be experienced on Shabbat, can deeply enhance that giving. Now, so that's the first bit I'm arguing, is that Zoraya enables us to pull back from a certain type of planting in the world in order to do it better and differently. But also, secondarily, that there's a spiritual dimension to Zoraya that we can only do on Shabbat. The spiritually creative work of Zoraya, of planting, of seeding, of tapping into potentiality. So that's to say we pause from Zoraya, a certain type of Zoraya, and engage in another type as well. So we don't really pause from tzedakah. We engage in our recommitment to righteousness. And almost double down on it, because part of tzedakah, as we know from our tradition, is not only the giving of money, but how we give it that enhances dignity rather than decreases it. So we engage in the type of tzedakah that enhances our appreciation and engagement with human dignity. That it's not merely a monetary transactional relationship.
Hi, we have another comment. This is from, I think, Rabbi Mark Biller. He writes, love the thought of Shabbat as a rest toward renewal, towards re-engagement. Such a different concept than, quote, a list of restrictions.
Yes, great. Thank you. Thank you for that, Rabbi Biller. It's great that you're here with us also. I'm honored to be learning with scholars, and these comments and questions really enhance the experience. And I think that's right. I think that one of the great failures of Judaism, prior to the last few decades, and that's not to say we're thriving at it now necessarily, but actually is that we taught Judaism as a system of rules, right? You should just do this and don't do that. That's a failure of any system that holds on to rules. Also with parenting, how we think about, or any system that has rules, any institution. But actually that Judaism is most certainly, and ethics is most certainly not just a system of rules, but has a deeper layers of meaning to them. And we may find those layers of meaning persuasive or not, and that persuasion might lead us in different directions. But I do think that Shabbat as a system of rules is dry at best and empty at wrong, at worst. But actually that this relationship between creation and Mishkan and our own self-renewal and towards our repair of the world, I believe to be deeply interconnected, as we're going to see in a lot of these sources. And I really believe that Shabbat, I want to say the most, but I'm going to be more humble and say the top three, is the top three most important Jewish contributions to the world. This notion of Shabbat and what it can offer the activist community, what it can offer the healing community, what it can offer the really humanity at large, but not just humanity. Shabbat is about human renewal, but it's also about environmental justice. Give the land time to have a break. It's about animal rights. Give animals a break. It's about worker justice. Give workers a break from work. And so it is about deepening empathy for all life and all of creation. I'm allowing time for 8 more minutes, but we don't need it if there's not more to sharing. But I do want to embrace more silent pauses in case there are folks who will engage. Okay, so I think we're going to pause here. So friends, just some notes of process. First of all, thank you all so much. I'm really so honored that this group is joining. I hope you'll continue to join. This will, as I said, be 10 o'clock Pacific each Tuesday. And that's where we can tap in at this link. It'll be the same link. Hopefully you have registered so that if there's a time change, you will receive that update. But these will also be recorded and posted on the Valley Beit Midrash website learning library where you can get it. And so you can access that there as well by podcast, if you prefer podcast, or by video as well. And this was Zoraya. Next week will be Choresh, plowing, Choresh. If you have any comments, critiques, or suggestions going forward, please email them to me, Rabbi Yanklowitz at gmail.com, or learn@valleybeitmidrash.org, so that we can adjust in any ways possible. And again, I'm very grateful to you, wishing you all a wonderful day. Thank you so much.